So some of you may know me. I was previously the industrial chair for the National Additive Manufacturing Strategy Steering Group. And I've really been involved in additive manufacturing from a orthopedic perspective, really since 2001 when we first looked at it. Not very impressed in 2001, looked again at about 2008 and 2009. And I've been talking on the use of additive manufacturing in orthopedics now for a number of years. And I've put here be dragons, and that's very well known on the maps where you are heading off into the unknown. And I still feel today that we know a little bit more, but certainly back then, how little we did know of additive manufacturing in a complex and regulated environment. So next, thank you. So really, what's the market or what's the industry really like? We're all very aware that the UK has a really important leading manufacturing sector, and we've often talked about the aerospace, but I think few really recognise the importance of Meditech now in the UK. And I think you can see there that really the importance of Meditech, certainly over the last few years, has increased significantly. But that does include digital health, which includes things like MR and CT scanners. But really is important that we do support the Meditech sector within the UK. So we'll move on. Thank you. So I really came from orthopedic background. I started back in 1989 at the Centre for Biomedical Engineering, UCL. At that time, it was an academic department, and we specialised in the manufacture, the design and manufacture of specialist orthopedic implants, predominantly where we're taking large segments of bone out, where mainly for bone cancer. And of those are often children. And one of my earliest designs of a prosthesis was the little chap on your left, the 2-year-old who's now 28. And I designed that extendable little implant 26 years ago. He's now on his 5th, but he still has his leg. And these are complex orthopedic reconstructions, and we were very much a pioneer. And back in 1997, we established Stanmore Implants worldwide, and I was the first CEO. We got involved in a lot of complex reconstructions where I was really considering how important additive manufacturing and other technologies would be. But perhaps out of all of our most famous patients, Oscar with Noel Fitzpatrick there is one of our most famous, who had both of his hind legs chopped off, and this was an amputation prosthesis that we were developing. So next, please. So how big really is orthopedics in the UK? Well, surprisingly, today we actually put in now more. This is back from 2018. It's the most up-to-date statistics we have. We actually put in more knee replacements than we do hip replacements. But in total, around about 200,000, excluding Scotland. And it might surprise you that actually of the custom made, and Stanmore was being one of the principal manufacturers of custom made prostheses in the country, only about, less than 0.5%, so less than 1,000 custom-made, truly patient-specific implants are actually implanted each year in the UK, and most of those are for complex conditions. Next, please. So we got into additive manufacturing back in realistically in 2008, and one of our earliest cases that we actually, the first case we ever put in was this large pelvis for a tumor in an engineer, and we tried getting this right. Lars Ryberg from ex-Arcam now is on the call as well, and he will remember that we were developing or trying to develop the ways of using this technology to really improve the manufacture. We had been doing hemipelvic replacements, milling them out of machines, but that would take 3 to 5 days. A lot of material wastage, about only 1/3 of it being used. But we also wanted to attach bone ingrowth. But these conditions are very complex and very, shouldn't say the word very unique, but are unique. And if you look at the complexity of this case, you can see that pin that crosses the spine. And that pin must be designed to avoid all the neurological structures and to ensure we don't paralyze the patient or give them incontinence or other conditions. So the problem with this type of prosthesis is that are very, very difficult to manufacture. This one actually, we had 6 to 8 actually aborted attempts of manufacture. We're having these manufactured in Italy, and we actually at the end had them manufactured both using e-beam and using laser. And we selected the best after a while, and that's what went into the patient. About a 12-hour operation. And that was our first experiences into additive manufacturing, and they weren't. They were very nervous times for us. So really, a lot of my talk today is how we've really managed some of those processes, or should we actually be doing it? So next, please. So one of my really thoughts was, how do we bring together CT imaging, the design, and I was very interested in using computer-based guidance and robotics, surgical robotics, and I was fortunate enough to have a wealthy venture capitalist who acquired a company for me which was making surgical robots, and together with additive manufacturing, we felt that we had a really excellent opportunity to take forward digital imaging right through the whole process to producing both personalized implants and also the appropriate cutting guides if we were using cutting guides rather than the robot itself. And you can see there as an X-ray back in 2012, that was a young soldier who had part of his knee blown away that we replaced using our surgical robot. And this really was prior to me having any understanding of about 4.0, but I think today, I think this does really give an example of how we can use AI and VR and AR actually in surgical preparation to give the surgeon much better performances of the implants. Next, please. So there's a lot of hype, and that's probably been one of the biggest issues in medtech, has been the hype. Printing parts, we often get, why can't you do this? And why can't we print a heart? And why can't we do this? Well, it's really, really difficult. But the market is increasing. And I think it's very important to say that companies like Stryker, one of the largest orthopedic companies, have today produced over 1 million standardized orthopedic implants. They're not patient specific. And J&J last year invested 36 million euros into Ireland. Next. So AM, as we're all well aware, can offer tremendous amount, and we often get quoted about it can produce patient-specific implants. You can have it right next to the operating theatres. We can, and in our next talk, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about things like biomimetic structures, so I won't talk about those. But also perhaps the future as well, where we're actually printing, already starting to do this already, the bioprinting of musculoskeletal tissues, which can have a organic or inorganic scaffold. So I think this is really the beginnings of using additive manufacturing in medical reconstructions. Next. So there's been a tremendous amount of money being put into the additive manufacturing. If you just look at these two publicly funded groups so far, Innovate at 91 million, EPSRC at 118, a significant amount. And in medtech, we looked through all the projects, about 5% went into healthcare from Innovate, but 40% of all EPSRC funding went in some form of healthcare. And then when you add in things like Wellcome, BBSRC, MRC, and other charitables, there is actually a significant amount of money that has gone into additive manufacturing for the benefit of improving healthcare. I'd like to see how we're really developing that over the next few years. Next. But we're all well aware, as I've just said, about the hype, and this Gartner from 2018 really does show that medtech is, heading down to that trough hopefully disillusionment. And this is something that I think a lot of medtech companies have explored, and finding it has been really very, very difficult to actually get on to adopt the technologies in a commercial opportunity that they can undertake. Next. But we've almost really need to be asking about how successful how successful are implants. These are patient-specific implants. The one on the right is a CAD-CAM hip from Stanmore, and you can see the follow-up there, 10 to 17 years. We didn't have one stem failure. So none of them came out for loosening or infection for any other mode. And more recently, there has been a paper from the Swiss group, their 97% success rate at 20 years. Next. So we really need to find out what is the clinical need for using additive manufacturing. You know, there is no such thing as the 105% success rate. You know, it's 100%, and we can't improve on that unless it's going to take it out further down the line. So one of the questions really is, what's the clinical need? The second question is, do we need an alternative manufacturing route? Should we be using, you know, this new-ish technology for something that is being already used in practice, using like the CNC machine? 90 minutes used to take us to carve out a hip replacement, which is very cost effective. When you look at hip replacements, a cheap and cheerful hip replacement today, buying in a hospital, is around about £600. So your cost of goods probably around about £200, and that includes the plastic cup in the pelvis, as well as the femoral stem. And the other difficulty, unlike many other sectors, that it takes us many, many years to demonstrate how successful they actually are. Next. And one of the problems, we have a litigious society, and this was a design from a few years ago. You can see 2013 there, how disastrous this has been. This was a design issue, but this is not unique. There's been also manufacturing complications as well by companies such as Sulzer, a very well-known Swiss company. But when you're taken to court for $4.4 billion US, it's an eye-watering amount of money. And that can easily be something that could happen again if we get additive manufacturing and its processes incorrect. Next. And when you look, talking often about patient-specific, about the variability, every patient is unique, and off-the-shelf components are like off-the-shelf clothing from M&S or wherever. You know, most hip replacements will fit the vast majority of patients. And here just gives you some idea of some of the hips. On the right-hand side is a little dwarf, and they're about 35 mils long, so pretty small. And they'll go right up to about 350 mils in length, and a little bit longer if need be. So there's a huge variety. So how do we control some of the processes within the additive manufacturing chamber when we have such great variability? If you've got standard components, you can make quite a few hundred, chop them all up, as we're well aware, and evaluate them. But how do you evaluate a patient-specific implant other than possibly using something like micro CT? Next. And when you look, and this is, and I do appreciate that this is an appalling piece of additive manufacturing. I can't remember where it came from, but this was some work that we were doing at UCL on trying to identify the vascular, to see if we could get vascular structures. And this was, I think, one of the first times that we'd ever shown that vascular structures could actually construct themselves within an additive manufactured lattice. But look at the debris. I mean, you know, is that unfused powder? You know, that is a really quite scary micrograph. Next. And when you start looking at all the post-processing treatments, there are many, many. And as I was saying, it was walking into the unknown, and we spent a long time speaking to a whole variety of companies. How do you really clean up the lattice work, or should you clean up the lattice work? What techniques should we use? And we looked at things like slurries and various electrochemical methods, or methods of actually just using, well, as I say, these slurries from various different industries, the aerospace and automotive in particular. But we really struggled to actually find the best methods of then really producing a structure that we desired, because we were looking for wall thicknesses about 50 microns, apertures about 250 microns, but really so they were consistent, and that was the issue that we were really facing. Next. So when you look, and I won't go through all of this, you know, the design for manufacture was often quoted, but really we came up with something in one of our Innovate projects with Robin Wilson, saying really it should be designed for cleaning. If you can't remove all this debris, it could be the shot blasting materials, it could be some of the agents that you were using whilst machining, if you were wet machining, it could be a whole variety of other contaminants, such as handling, when you're handling the materials themselves, or even packaging. We found in our Innovate project 32 contaminants within our lattice structure, some are organic and some other. And I believe that, you know, for me, this was probably one of the biggest and scariest issues that we're faced with. And probably if the regulators really wanted to jump up and down on us, this is the area that I would focus upon, about something that is very difficult in deep structure lattices, how you actually assess that you've cleaned out all the debris. We used to use a tricloran N as one of our agents, and others use an aqueous solution. But it has been very difficult, and that's really where we're starting to come to work together on the national strategy. And Peter Williams from MPL is online today as well. He headed up our work group on post-processing, and this was my main issue, was how do we clean devices. Next. So the national strategy, I'll say a little bit about this. It was published in 2017, but set off back in 2014, a number of work groups, and some of those were absolutely fundamental to understand the additive manufacturing, and others actually how you adopt the manufacturing, such as, you know, how do you invest, but probably out of all of them, and you can see I've highlighted there, the standards and certification, particularly in the Meditech sector, were the things that we were being told was, this is why we're not getting on board. We all know about additive manufacturing and what it can do and how we may be able to change devices, but how do we understand what is going to be approved and not approved when the regulators were still trying to really catch up and saying, this is good, this is bad, don't like this or like that. So the national strategy really came together. Over 400 people were involved in it, and these different working groups. And as I said, in 2017, we published the strategy. It had 28 different recommendations. But as you can see on the right-hand side, I just starred what I felt that at the time for the medtech sector was the real burning issues. And you can see that IP was very low, but also skills and education. Really, we felt that that was not such a big issue for us. We had many very good engineers involved. And today, I think it may be quite a similar approach to that. Next, please. I won't go through this, of course. This train timetables are never exciting, but this really just shows you the development. This was taken from ISO TC 261 a few months ago, but the range of standards today, and I had got it highlighted that there is a whole variety there on processes, but also on the digital transformation of the modeling, etc., etc. But probably really important for the medtech sector was the development of the ASTM on the way of assessing and removing materials from lattice structures in particular. So we have moved a tremendous amount further forward, particularly I think on the regulatory and the standards, and we've got a much better appreciation of that. But even so, we are still worried about how that will actually be undertaken under new regulations like the MDR for Europe. Next slide, please. I think it's the last. So really, today I'm looking back at it. Really, this was really a retrospective view. I feel that additive manufacturing, we've really not taken the essence of additive manufacturing. We're still really reproducing existing designs, but just tweaking them. And what we're not doing is really utilizing the full opportunities that additive manufacturing can really offer. And I see perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years, when we're making changes to our alloy structures that some companies are now moving forward, but also how we're integrating soft tissues. So we're using biological materials with inorganic materials as well, that we are starting to change what really has been a very traditional business. Hip replacement has hardly changed in 50 odd years. So hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, using additive manufacturing, we will make a significant difference. So thank you very much.